Up next on U.S. Bank Business Watch, presented by the Business Courier. It's cause for celebration. Look inside the Courier's book of lists and a year in review that brought jobs, beer, and success for startups. The case is closed, but who is the person inside the tiger suit? The Business Courier has a one-on-one with the repelling feline. And a new bar that pays homage to the days when you could not legally drink alcohol in Cincinnati. U.S. Bank Business Watch is next. Good morning and happy holidays. Welcome to U.S. Bank Business Watch. I'm Peg Rasconi. On the Business Courier front page centerpiece this week, it's end of year, and at the Business Courier, that means the book of lists. It's a lot to digest, so we have a little primer to help you identify what is trending now. Mergers and acquisitions totally overhauled the landscape of Cincinnati's accounting world in 2014. The trend is largely the result of an increased need for added expertise in complex areas such as healthcare. The Breakthrough Industry of the Year award goes to logistics, the art of matching freight with transportation. High-profile cybersecurity hacks in 2014 proved the cost of being unprepared can be catastrophic. This year has been a significant one in terms of expansions and developments at some of the area's largest hospitals, including Christ Hospital, Tri-Health, and Cincinnati Children's. Momentum in downtown Cincinnati has been growing for the better part of a decade, but in 2014, the city and Hamilton County landed the biggest wins in modern memory. There was the overwhelming passage of the Icon tax to pay for repairs to Union Terminal. It was one of the most contentious debates of the year, led by a who's who of Cincinnati corporate leaders. And there's the decision by General Electric to bring its global operations center to the banks. This is a rendering of the new building. GE selected the banks over sites in Mason and Oakley. The site is expected to eventually employ around 2,000 people. Part of the reason GE chose the banks centered around access to parking and public transportation. Big transportation stories this year include continuation of streetcar construction and Metro looking to expand its bus service. Also, the Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International Airport made great strides landing and keeping a long elusive species for Cincinnati, the low-cost carrier. It's clear that CVG is in the future plans of Frontier and Allegiant Airlines, both of which quickly expanded in 2014. There is so much in the book of lists, it's hard to know when to stop. So let's take a break and turn it over to Business Courier editor Rob Dawmeyer and producer Kelly Leon to get their take on what's in it and what it means to you. Kelly?
Thanks, Peg. It's so much fun to interview you, Rob.
Okay. I'll choose to believe you.
Usually Rob's here
That's
interviewing
right.
someone. Now
That's right.
I get to put him on the hot seat.
That's right.
Like it. So we saw some of the trends.
Right.
You guys spend a lot of time compiling this, and it's kind of like all year long. And
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a full-time research director, Hannah McCartney, who does a fantastic job. I mean, collecting this kind of data is still, you have to hit the phones. I mean, we're still doing this the old-fashioned way. You know, a lot of times companies in town are just too busy. Really, they know they want to be in the book. They know they'll be in the book, but for whatever reason, they just don't respond. So having a full-time researcher is key to everything we do, and that's the only way we're able to produce those weekly lists and then this big, giant 164-page book of lists.
Yeah, which a lot of people, including me, keep around
yeah,
and,
well, that's
and kind
our,
of refer to.
That's our intention. We hope it's a 12-month product.
Yeah.
And it's a big advertising generator for us. It's a big part of our business.
Yeah. And it really, in looking at some of the top stories, you know, you find those within, like this whole GE thing. That's probably the biggest story of the year, do you think?
It is. Well, we think it is. We actually sat down as a group and talked about what were the biggest stories of the year, and for us it came down to GE opening at the banks with up to 2,000 employees, or Procter & Gamble announcing that it was going to get rid of half of its brands. I mean, that's a massive story as well, and that continues to break. We just got news this week that they got rid of Zest and Camay. But we felt with the jobs and with GE making an impact on the banks right on the front porch of the city we thought that was the most important story for Cincinnati, business story for Cincinnati.
Yeah, I mean, they've had the entertainment, they've had the residential.
Yep.
Now they have the business.
That was the missing piece.
Talk about mixed use.
Yep.
So, well, yeah, preview to come of we'll have our first issue of the year coming up, and
That's right.
You will refer to that book of lists throughout that year.
Absolutely.
I'm quite sure.
We will.
Yeah. So thanks for being here. Happy New Year to you.
You too.
And we'll be back next week in the new year.
Great.
For now, back to Peg.
All right, thanks to Kelly and Rob. Well, parking fees are going up in downtown Cincinnati and over the Rhine effective Friday. New smart meters were installed the week before Christmas. Rates in over the Rhine will increase to $1 an hour. They're $2 an hour in the Central Business District. And pay hours will be extended 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Saturday in those areas.
Pay attention. We want you to pay attention because we don't want you to get a ticket. Paying your meter is much cheaper than getting a parking ticket.
The smart meters will take credit cards in addition to coins, so no worries if you don't have change. Cincinnati's exciting startup scene is centered in Over the Rhine. Some of the biggest startup stories of 2014 include e-commerce giant Amazon tapping local 3D printing startup 3DLT to help pioneer a new online division to sell 3D printed goods. The selection of former Silicon Valley CEO Wendy Lee as the new chief executive of Centrifuge. And the launching of Ocean, the Crossroads church-backed startup accelerator. While many companies had reason to celebrate in 2014, not all were so fortunate. Check out the Business Courier website for the top 10 bankruptcies of 2014. Strangely, 2 of those are yogurt companies. The companies represent more than $21 million in debt and span industries from retail to manufacturing to nonprofit to technology. The list is based on information from the lead section of the Business Courier, which is available to all subscribers. We all know that a repelling tiger made international headlines for Cincinnati-based Procter & Gamble. But what do we know about the person wearing this now infamous tiger suit? Well, Business Courier reporter Barrett Brunsman has an interview in this week's print edition with Marcella Koala Largess, who wants the costume back. The activist pled guilty earlier this month, and the case was settled. It's an interesting and, dare we say, funny read in a mostly very serious business newspaper. Be sure to check it out. Dozens of new restaurants opened or were announced in 2014, while 10 permanently shut their doors. You will find a list of some of them in the Business Courier print edition. And no one can dispute that Cincinnati's revived urban core has seen a revival of our city's long-standing love affair with beer. Breweries like Rheingeist are even pairing historic preservation with their operations. And Vine Street has become ubiquitous as the haven for trend-setting restaurateurs, many of whom attracted nationwide attention over the past year. The Blind Pig is Cincinnati's new Prohibition-themed bar behind O'Malley's in the Alley downtown. The 3rd Street bar was named for the slang term used for speakeasies during Prohibition. Many of the bar's craft cocktails pay homage to Prohibition and Cincinnati's historic taverns and speakeasies.
Everything in here is Cincinnati to its core. From the pictures, there's actually a picture of my great-grandmother hanging up in here who was from Cincinnati, but we just wanted to bring a different feel of just nightlife, speakeasy, open, kind of comforting place.
Framed newspaper clippings and photographs from the Prohibition era hang on its walls, and the chandelier there is made from dozens of empty bottles of Jameson Irish whiskey. And on Thursday, January 1st, the new bar called Lachey, owned by brothers Nick and Drew, will open at 12th and Walnut Streets in Over the Rhine. The ribbon was recently cut for the bar, which will have a sports theme and lots of TVs for local team viewing. The location holds a lot of memories for Cincinnati's famous singing brothers.
We went to school, just 2 blocks away at SCPA on Sycamore, and we literally spent every day of our lives seemingly walking through this neighborhood from the bus to school. And I think we always understood the potential of this area, and so it's so exciting to see this rebirth that Over the Rhine is going through, and it just, the opportunity to be a part of that, especially on a business level, was very exciting for us.
The Lacheys and 4EG worked with the city to preserve the historic facade of the building, formerly the Pabst Bedding Warehouse building, but the interior is all modern. It will also be the site of a reality program for the brothers, so stay tuned for information on that. Well, up next on U.S. Bank Business Watch, I'll look back at the market in 2014. Did you make any money? And remember the pop-up shop we told you about a couple weeks ago? We'll take you inside to see how those startups did. Well, 2 weeks ago, we told you about 7 local startups that were pulling together to sell their products in a one-day holiday pop-up shop. Well, we're happy to report they did quite well. Local 12's Brad Underwood spent some time at the Cincy Startup Store and shows us how the unique space in Over the Rhine offered the perfect platform.
For 12 hours, the showcase gave these 7 local companies the opportunity to interact with their customers, allowing them the chance to physically see and touch all the products that they're selling. A pop-up in a pop-up? Only in Over the Rhine. Simple Space on 13th Street is the place for these 7 local startups to show just what they can do.
Eyeglasses or wristbands, battery packs, bow ties, all of that stuff where it really helps to touch it, to feel it, to pick it up, to wear it, to try it on, and you can't do that online.
Taking the time to stop and talk to the creators of the products is something John Sherwin is excited about. And Sherwin says the location of this first ever Cincy Startup Store is perfect.
I think Over the Rhine area here really lends itself to a place like this. A lot of young people, a lot of great ideas, and people are just casually walking by and coming in and checking it out. It's a really good spot.
In the middle of the crowded room, Mike Bagby shows off his product, Plus Blue, custom engraved mobile battery packs.
An easy way of explaining that would be when you go to the Cincinnati Bengals game on Monday night, you're not there to charge your phone, but you want your phone to be charged. So you put this in your pocket, you rent it from us, you take it back to your seat, enjoy the game, hopefully see a big win, bring it back and drop it off to us after the game.
But possibly more intriguing than the pop-up startup store is the space itself. Simple Space is a platform of sorts for temporary projects, a physical space waiting to be occupied.
This space right here is just designed to be an empty box. It's a blank slate. We want people to fill it. We want artists to do stuff with it, and we don't want to get in the way.
Before the startups popped up, Simple Space hosted a magazine launch and even a birthday party. In Over the Rhine, Brad Underwood, Local 12 News.
And let's hope the Bengals game tonight turns out the same way as that Monday night game that was mentioned in the story. Well, keeping with our year-end trend theme, it's now time to turn to the markets. In this morning's U.S. Bank Economic 360, U.S. Bank Senior Vice President and Senior Portfolio Manager Mindy McLaughlin joins Business Courier editor Rob Dahlmeyer to talk about how the markets performed this year. Mindy and Rob.
Peg, thank you. Minnie, thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure.
So most people are in the market whether they really think about it or not. If they're in a 401k, they're really probably not spending a lot of time thinking about it, but that doesn't mean that big things aren't happening. How did the markets perform this year, and who made money, or how did we make money?
Sure. It really depended where you were invested. The domestic U.S. market, the S&P 500, was up about 12% this year. Right. So pretty decent year here at home in the large company space. If you were pretty heavily invested abroad, you probably lost some money. The developed international and the emerging market indexes were down 7 to 9%. So had a little bit of trouble there. A surprise this year was the commercial real estate sector. The REIT index was up big time, over 20%, and that was probably primarily due to the fact that they pay pretty high dividends and investors were looking for income. But then on the flip side, the commodity area, certainly we've talked about the price of oil falling and so forth, and commodities did not do well at all this year. And the other thing is, I think this year, unlike last year, large company stocks outperformed the smaller company stocks, and the value style did a lot better than the growth style this year.
So before I ask you for your predictions, was this a more volatile year? I mean, when you talk about the U.S. Stock market being up 7%, you're not talking about international being flat. It's way down. You talk about the good sectors being way up. And was 14 more volatile than normal, or is this just what it is now?
Well, it was kind of a different year. I mean, you think about the beginning of this year, we had such a bad winter, and after the first quarter, it became clear that across the globe, growth had really come to a screeching halt. And so initially what we saw was not a whole lot of companies were putting up pretty big numbers. And interest rates fell, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but I think one of the big surprises was the utility sector, which is usually a pretty boring sector, was one of the best performing sectors this year. So that was a little bit different, and I think, again, that's primarily due to the fact that interest rates had fallen and investors were looking for income. A couple areas that typically tend to do well and we think will continue would be the healthcare and the technology sectors. Those are more growth oriented, and they had a wonderful year. Flip side is energy, again, directly related to the price of oil. Energy was the worst performing sector. So a lot of investors out there have big positions in energy companies. So you lost some money there this year, but the dividend is nice and we think is safe. And then really, I think if you look at the consumer space, and I've talked about this here before, I think with the fall in the price of oil, we're starting to see consumers spend more money on retail and restaurants, so that sector is starting to pick up steam and do a lot better.
So obviously you don't have a crystal ball, and I'm sure you hate when people ask you this, but I will anyway. Tough luck.
Yeah.
What do you see ahead? You teased that healthcare and technology is something to look at, but I mean, do most people think oil is going to stay down next year?
We do think it's probably going to stay pretty low here for a while, and so next year we're forecasting at least the S&P 500, the broad index, to see about a 7 to 8% type of return. We think earnings will grow. The U.S. economy is improving. We think the U.S. is going to be the better market again, and like the large company stocks. So, I think that energy commodity complex will kind of be taking a breather here for a little while, but it's really going to be important, I think, to focus on companies that have nice dividends. I think the dividend's going to matter more next year, and certainly companies that grow their dividends. And really at the end of the day, it's going to be the kind of a market we think where you want to buy on the dips. When there's a pullback, that's when you want to go in, and it's probably going to be a little more muted next year, but hopefully positive.
One more question for you. It's not as sexy as the stock market, but the bond market is enormous.
Yes.
Important. Where do you see that?
Sure. And we've talked a lot about bonds this year here on the show, and interest rates and so forth. And I think a big surprise this year was that interest rates actually fell and stayed low. I mean, this time last year, I think I did the show, and the 10-year Treasury was at about 3%. It's at 2.2. Wow. So long-term bonds, I think, did well this year, but probably won't do as well next year as interest rates rise. So really, at the end of the day, I think you need to know what you own, rebalance, and over the long term, the market will reward you.
Good. Well, hey, Mindy, thanks so much for that intelligence, and Happy New Year.
Same to you. Thanks.
And back to you, Peg.
Thanks, Rob. No question is too tough for Mindy. Well, still to come on U.S. Bank Business Watch, do you love it or hate it? How to find job happiness in 2015. Stay with us. In this morning's Business Insight, it's becoming a tradition. End of year means we bring in Cincinnati's resident expert on job happiness. Because after all of us want to be happy doing the work that we do every day. Julie Bauke, the Chief Career Happiness Officer of the Bauke Group, joins Business Watch producer Kelly Leon in the studio with some advice to get your year off to the right start. Julie and Kelly.
Thanks, Peg. We like having you here this time of year.
Well, I like being here.
We want to start the year off right. What's the first piece of advice that you're going to give to us?
Well, we always put our resolutions around things like money and health and those sort of things, which is all great.
Yeah.
But very rarely do we say, I want to become happier in what I do. I want to maybe find a new job. I want to do something different in my career. It seems sometimes when the calendar page rolls over to January, it can really feel like more of the same, and that's not always good.
And I think about different times in my life. When you're young and you're starting out, you're kind of like, I'm just grateful to have a job.
Right.
Is sometimes the mentality. As you get older, it's like, well, if I put in a few more years, I'm finished. I may as well stick with it, even though I'm not happy. What kind of advice would you give throughout the range of ages and I know you work with people of all ages.
Sure. When you're young and first coming into the job market, you can afford to take some risks. In other words, you might try something that you've never tried before, or you might kind of go down a couple different paths because you have a lot of runway left to make it up. The older you get, the less time you have in the job market to make it up, and probably the more concerned you are and should be about things like retirement. So the risk-taking factor as you're older may diminish unless you're blessed with abundant resources, which few of us are.
Right.
So you have to really take a long look. And I am such an advocate of, don't look at your career or your job in a vacuum. You want to look at it in the context of your whole life. And when you're 22, 23, in most cases it's just you. As you get older, you have more responsibilities, and so you want to make sure that you're integrating everything so that you're not living your career separately from the rest of your life. Hard to do, but really important.
And jobs are changing so much. You know, I've heard it said in the future we'll create our own jobs as opposed to just applying for jobs. Is that, do you hear that too?
Oh yeah, and I also hear things like, you know, the jobs that our children have, depending on how old your children are, in a lot of cases they don't even exist yet.
Yeah.
And right. So, but yeah, so you want to think about it in terms of not a job or a box on the org chart, but you want to think about it in terms of work. So you might do some work for a company 3 days a week and actually have a role in their organization where they need you 3 days a week, but you might do some consulting 2 days a week, or you might volunteer 2 days a week. So it's about creating a body of work, and how you get paid may vary based on what you're doing. And to me, that's great because you have the opportunity to utilize your skills in a variety of ways.
Yeah, and that sounds exciting, but I think that's scary to a lot of people to think of. I know I do that. I juggle a couple of different things, and it's very rewarding, but it is a little scary, and if you're the type of person who wants that certainty, how do you give yourself that little push and permission to do that?
Well, and what you just said is something that people cling to, but falsely. They shouldn't. There is no such thing as certainty of security.
Exactly.
And I had a friend once who used to say, job security is your ability to secure a job, which means that you have to make sure that you become and stay employable at all stages in your career. And so, putting all your eggs in the basket of an employer is tempting, but just look at your whole life. Is that really what you want, or do you want to create some other things there?
Yeah. Great advice, Julie. Thank you. We love having you on we're going to have you on the last show of the year every year, so you can help us jumpstart our careers.
All right.
Peg, I hope you're happy in your career, Peg.
I am, and that sounds like a great tradition. Julie, last show of every year. It's great. Thank you, Kelly and Julie. And thank you for joining us this morning for U.S. Bank Business Watch. We'll be back next Sunday and every Sunday morning at 6:30 here on Local 12 and at 10 a.m. on the CW. For more business news all week long, you can visit the Business Courier online and sign up for daily emails and follow on Twitter and Facebook. The address is CincinnatiBusinessCourier.com. I'm Peg Rasconi. Have a great Sunday and a very happy New Year.